We all like to think of our memories as these perfect little recordings of the past. But what if they aren't? What if they're more like living documents that are constantly being revised? Today, we're going to dive into some incredible research that shows how one single, tiny experience can literally go back in time and rewrite a memory. So let's just start with this big question. Are your memories really set in stone? I mean, think about it. When you pull up a memory from your childhood, are you actually accessing the original pristine file? Or are you opening a copy that's been edited and saved over and over and over again? For a long time, this has been a huge debate in neuroscience. On one hand, you've got the static photo album idea, that memories are fixed, unchanging snapshots. But on the other hand, there's this idea of memory as an editable document, where new experiences can actually go in and alter what you originally saved. Well, the study we're looking at today gives a really surprising answer.
And to figure this out, scientists turned to a pretty unlikely hero, the humble fruit fly. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. A fly? But it turns out their tiny little brains have memory circuits that are fundamentally a lot like our own. That makes them perfect for tackling these huge questions about how memory works.
Okay, so the experiment they set up was just beautiful in its simplicity. Here's what they did. First, they trained flies to associate a certain smell with a little sugar reward. That sugar is what scientists call the unconditioned stimulus, or US. It's the thing the fly just naturally wants. Then, a few hours later, they just gave the flies the sugar again, but this time all by itself, no smell. And finally, they put the flies to the test to see if they still went for that smell they were trained on. And this is where things get really wild. Look at the bar on the left. Those are the control flies. They didn't get that extra sugar hit. And, yep, they still strongly preferred the smell they learned about. But now look at the bar on the right. The flies that got re-exposed to just the sugar, their preference for the smell completely vanished. Poof. It's like a little taste of sugar just deleted the memory. And this wasn't some fluke either. This effect was incredibly powerful. It worked on brand new memories and even on older long-term ones. And get this, it was super specific. Giving the flies just regular food or even a different type of sweet treat did nothing. It had to be the exact same sugar that they got in the original training. So this discovery just blew a huge question wide open. What in the world is actually happening inside the fly's brain? How can one little taste of sugar make it forget something it learned so well? This sent the researchers on a hunt, a kind of neurological detective story. Now, in any good mystery, you have your usual suspects. And in this case, the prime suspects were a specific group of dopamine neurons in flies. They're called PAM-DNs. You can think of these guys as the brain's editors. We already knew they were involved in learning what's good and what's bad, but they're also known to actively erase old memories in a process called, you guessed it, active forgetting. They were the obvious culprits. So the scientists tested this idea directly. They used some cool genetic tricks to basically just switch on these dopamine neurons whenever they wanted. And the result, which you can see right here, was crystal clear. Turning on the neurons made the memory disappear, just like the sugar did. Case closed, right? The sugar must be flipping the switch on these forgetting neurons. Well, this is where the story takes a really fascinating twist. I mean, if the theory is that sugar activates these dopamine neurons to cause forgetting, then if you block those neurons, the forgetting shouldn't happen, right? But it did. This is the major plot twist of the whole story. When the scientists gave the flies the sugar, but at the same time blocked those dopamine neurons so they couldn't send any signals, the memory still vanished. The forgetting happened anyway. This was huge. It meant the usual suspects were innocent. Something totally different was going on. Okay, let's just pause on that because it's so important. The brain's known delete button, this active forgetting pathway, wasn't being pressed. The memory wasn't being actively erased. So that left the researchers with a brand new and much weirder mystery to solve. To solve it, they had to go even deeper. They had to find a way to actually look at the physical trace of the memory in the brain, what neuroscientists call the memory engram, to see if it was even still there after the fly's behavior changed so dramatically. And what they found is summed up perfectly by this one line from their paper. It says, US-mediated devaluation does not erase the initial memory trace. Let me translate that for you. The sugar reward didn't actually delete the memory. It wasn't gone. And here is the incredible visual proof. Using some really advanced imaging techniques, the scientists could literally watch the neurons that were holding on to that memory. And what they saw was just astonishing. Even in the flies that had forgotten, the ones who no longer cared about the smell, the brain cells that held that original memory were still lighting up. The memory file was still on the hard drive, even if the fly couldn't seem to open it anymore. This leads us to a whole new idea: memory suppression. This isn't about deleting a memory. It's more like building a new layer on top of it. It's a competing signal that basically tells the brain, hey, you know that old memory? Yeah, just ignore that for now. The original info is still there, it's just being blocked. But the story has one more crucial twist. It turns out the brain is incredibly smart about when it decides to suppress a memory. It's not random. It all comes down to context. This is just so cool. If the fly got that surprise sugar reward in some random neutral little tube, the memory got suppressed. But, and this is the key, if they got the extra sugar in the exact same maze where they were first trained, the memory was protected. It stayed totally intact. It's like the brain was saying, whoa, 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 hang on, this is the place where we learned this. That old information might still be important here. And there was another protective shield they found: new learning. If that surprise sugar reward happened at the same time the fly was learning about a brand new smell, the brain seemed to prioritize learning the new thing and just left the old memory alone. It's like the brain can't multitask. It can't update an old memory and form a new one at the exact same time. So, okay, we've been deep in the world of fruit flies and dopamine neurons. What does all this mean for us, for our much bigger, more complicated brains? Well, it could fundamentally change how we think about our own minds and the very nature of memory. So let's just recap the huge takeaways here. First, simply re-experiencing something good can go back and update related memories by suppressing them, not erasing them. Second, this is a whole new way the brain does this, totally separate from that active forgetting we talked about. Third, and this is mind-blowing, the physical memory trace can stick around even when our behavior makes it look like it's gone. And finally, context is king. It's the gatekeeper that decides if a memory gets updated or not. If you're looking for a simple way to think about this, here it is. The memory file itself isn't dragged to the trash can. Instead, the new experience just breaks the desktop shortcut you used to click on to open it. The file's still there, buried deep in the computer, but that easy one-click access is gone. And this is where we get to the really big picture stuff. If unwanted memories, from trauma, from addiction, aren't actually deleted but are just suppressed, well, that opens up entirely new ways to think about therapy. Could we find ways to strengthen the suppression of a painful memory? Or maybe weaken the suppression of a positive one? It's a whole new frontier for treating things like PTSD, anxiety, and so much more. And that leaves us with one last big question for you to chew on. Think about your own life, your most vivid, deeply held memories. Which of them, without you ever knowing it, might have already been subtly rewritten or had their shortcuts broken by something that happened years later? It's a pretty wild thought about the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Thanks so much for tuning in.